So the Global Observatory of Long-Term Care is a platform to support the exchange of knowledge and information. And let me see if I get to move my slides. Apparently not. One second. And our idea is that the platform is supporting us in sharing knowledge on how to improve and strengthen care systems as part of the International Long-Term Care Policy Network. And basically, we're looking at how research and experiences can shape and improve care systems. So we're very interested in research, we're very interested in methods, and we're especially delighted today to have this very methodological webinar. The observatory is powered by willingness to share work and knowledge. And we do that in various ways. We do that by sharing publications, blogs, methods, and topic guides, but especially through the interest groups that organize their own webinars. And they're really helping us stay at the forefront of what's happening on research. You're all very welcome to join if you haven't done so. We list all the experts who join us by country, topics, and methods, and that's a good way of also finding people with similar interests. And we do share all the videos of webinars for people to access later. Our next webinar is going to be already in the new year on the 2nd of February. It's a very different topic. It's on sustainable continence care, and it's a joint webinar of the GOLTC continence care in long-term care and the climate change interest groups. And we really like it when interest groups come together as they're doing today. And then we have another one on the 11th of March on home-based care outcomes and looking at whether the choice of care provider matters. And that's a webinar of the quasi-experimental methods interest group. And if you haven't joined the observatory yet, there's a QR code on how to do that. And I know my colleague Naz will also be sharing a link on how to join. And that's it from me. I'm just very happy now to hand over to Xiujun Song and to Chiara De Poli from the Data Science and the Qualitative Research Methods interest groups who have come together for today's webinar.
Right, so thanks for your warm introduction. So hello everyone and welcome. My name is Jiyeon Song, an assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing in the United States. And then I have the pleasure of serving as chair of the data science interest group within the Global Observatory of Long-Term Care. And it is truly wonderful to be here today for this joint webinar with the qualitative interest group. And today's session focuses on the increasingly important and provocative question, does AI truly understand meaning? And further, what does it mean to conduct qualitative research using generative AI? These questions go far beyond methodology. They can touch on logic, ethics, and the future of research in the long-term care. So the level of global interest in this topic has been remarkable. We have nearly 200 registered participants from across the world. And then I think this reflects the shared sense that we are at the critical moment and AI is evolving rapidly and our research communities are striving to understand not only what this tool can do, but also how they should be used responsibly and thoughtfully in care research. So as the data science interest group, our mission is to explore how computational methods range from the classical statistics to machine learning, natural language processing, and large language model, and also emerging AI systems can advance our understanding of long-term care. Our aim to bridge disciplines, build capacity, and help researchers navigate both the opportunity and limitation of data-driven approaches. So increasingly, our work intersects with the kind of question raised in today's webinar, so particularly around interpretability, meaning, and the appropriate integration of AI into human-centered domain. The joint session with the qualitative research interest group represent a valuable opportunity to bring our perspective together. So sometimes qualitative inquiry and data science are often seen as separate words, but in reality, they are deeply complementary. So AI challenges us to think across this boundary to consider how meaning is constructed, how insights are generated, and how technology can support but not replace the human expertise essential to understand life experience in long-term care. Okay, so now I will pass it to to Dr. Chiara De Poi to introduce the qualitative research group and structure of our webinar today.
Yeah, thank you very much. So welcome also from me. My name is Chiara De Poli. I'm a research fellow at the Care Policy and Evaluation Center here at the London School of Economics and Political Science. And I do applied dementia research, mainly using qualitative research methods. And so when I put forward this idea of a crossover webinar with the data science group, I approached this idea really from a methodological perspective as a qualitative researcher in the context of dementia care, which flags a number of ethical issues often and some some specific methodological implications when we go about doing data collection in that specific field. So I'm very, very pleased to welcome our speakers today. We were just chatting before we started the webinar, and then we chatted about this organizing this webinar for weeks during the summer, and I'm very pleased that we are finally here together to have this discussion. So I think I'm very happy to introduce. So it's going to be a double act today. We have two presentations. We start with Dr. Jonas Wackinger from Germany. And then we move on to a second presentation by Professor David Morgan from Portland State University. And we'll wrap up the discussion at the end with a Q&A session open to everyone attending the webinar today. So I think we are all good to go. If Jonas would like to start and share your slides.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, as I said before, I just find it really exciting to kind of be here and to talk about this topic, and then also to hopefully discuss a bit about this topic, because I have the feeling, yeah, it's probably not going away. Like, so I think as qualitative researchers, or like also across like the different disciplines, I just yeah, always happy to talk about it and to kind of exchange. I will be talking a bit about work we did on comparing, in that case, ChatGPT and the human researcher and qualitative data analysis. But then I will also sort of use a little bit of my time to kind of talk about what we have done since, and sort of broadening the scope a bit, and also looking at different other aspects where sort of like qualitative research and LLMs might have synergies or might not work that well together. Just very quickly, in terms of, I wanted to say a few words about sort of my lens through which I do qualitative research, because I do have the feeling it might influence a little bit sort of some methods that we use and some ways how we engage with the data. So I'm with the Heidelberg Institute of Global Health here in Germany. I have a background in psychology and in medical anthropology, but I'm now part of the design and implementation research team here. So what we usually do is to use like a broader range of qualitative methods. So of course, like interviews and focus group discussions, but then we also use a lot of like think aloud exercises, observations, and like co-design methods. We have used drawings with little children, or like photo voice, shared walks, like sort of like a, yeah, the full toolbox in a sense, or always happy to try out new methods to then use these insights to really work with end users of a health intervention on how to kind of design an intervention and refine it. And so we've used it like in different ways, like both like sort of in the mHealth space, so using like mobile money technologies, but then also like in the context of vaccine hesitancy, like health information interventions. So this very practical side of things, like the design side. But then we also try and use these insights for like the more theoretical, like to gain like a more theoretical understanding of what is going on in sort of the like at this point where like humans and different stakeholders like interact with health interventions. So we look at it often through like more of an intersectionality perspective and like trying to understand what's going on in this decision-making space, so to say. So this is sort of what or like what we do in our group, and then at some point in I think early 2023, we were sitting together in like our office hours, and we're basically talking about like at the height of like ChatGPT coming around and everyone talking about it. We were like, okay, but how could LLMs or in that at that point ChatGPT help us in sort of this type of work that we are doing? And this is what sparked the work that then led to this publication. We did the work in 2023, and then the publication came out in early 2024. So it's been a while, like especially in this sort of LLM space where, yeah, I think a lot has happened since and keeps happening basically on a daily basis. So yeah, I'll sort of dive a bit into that, but then also talk a bit about what we've done since or how like we're currently thinking about it. So in these office hours, when we talked about it first, basically we talked about what we would want to do if we try and compare ChatGPT and a human research and qualitative data analysis. And we said, okay, there are basically three things that we would want to try at least and do. And one is we want to try to be like rather quick about it, because we had the feeling, okay, this is, yeah, there's so much happening right now, and we want to at least like our students using it and like sending us sort of data analysis ideas. And yeah, we just had the feeling, okay, it's if we do it, let's try and be quick about it. And so and at the same time, we wanted to make sure that we we're yeah, in no way kind of breaching data confidentiality or engaging with it in any like sort of unethical ways. So we said, okay, what we need is sort of our own data that we can just like freely use with it while still being unsure how like where this data might end up if we feed it into ChatGPT. So we did basically a mock interview. I interviewed another team member who is a young doctor, and we basically talked about AI in medical practice in Germany, because that's something he felt comfortable talking about. And we had the feeling, okay, we can just have this interview, and then we automatically transcribed the interview, but then like checked it and corrected it, and then had like sort of this it was just one interview of like an hour, had this data that we had the feeling, okay, this is something we feel comfortable with just like playing around with. The second thing that we wanted to do was to try and be as rigorous as we could, and this for us mainly meant that we wanted to try as much as possible to separate the two, like to have one person like engage with ChatGPT and like analyze the data with the help of ChatGPT, and then like a separate team member who's also very experienced qualitative researcher, we basically shared that transcript with her, and we're like, okay, and you please, like this is one transcript, please thematically analyze this transcript. And then in the end, sort of compared the two to avoid spillover between sort of the ChatGPT analysis and the human analysis. And then finally, we wanted to, like, we talked about it a bit, and we were like, okay, actually, we want to try and be as realistic as possible in the sense of we want what we try out to kind of reflect of what we imagine like a sort of a naive interaction would look like. So we thought, okay, do we want to spend like some time and involve like computer linguists to kind of create the perfect, or not the perfect, but like the very state-of-the-art prompt of how we could do this. And then we're like, no, actually, we are quite interested in just trying out what might happen if we, as like rather naive qualitative researchers, or at least that's what we felt at that point, just try it out. So in that sense, our prompting approach, by now probably all of us have learned a thing or two about prompting, but this is how we started. So we basically asked ChatGPT exactly the same thing that we asked the human researcher to do. So we told it, okay, this is the transcript, and now please thematically analyze it. And then, of course, we had like several iterations of this prompt, and then we also followed up with like more precise instructions. But yeah, this is, so to say, where we started. And then in terms of sort of looking at these different iterations and these different like results, so to say, that we then got back, the first column is basically the results from the human researcher. So the themes that she shared with us, and then we have the themes that ChatGPT, like from the ChatGPT output across these different iterations. And then we looked at it and we compared it and we brought everyone together, including the human researcher then at some point. And what we had the feeling, and this is something that I think by now is also quite established across the literature, is okay, actually it worked pretty well for like very descriptive themes. So like just describing what's there in the data, and yeah, like an output of sort of the core topics that we talked about in the interview interaction. And this was something where we had the feeling, okay, that's already in itself, like there's definitely a like a use case for this. Like there is a way in which LLMs can like might be able to support like developing a rapid understanding of sort of the descriptive level of a qualitative data set. But then at the same time, we were of course also interested in like, okay, but is there more to it? Like, and then we looked at the themes, and we had the feeling, okay, there are some instances that might suggest a bit more of an interpretative engagement. So maybe moving a little bit more into this like understanding meaning direction. So aspects like trust and responsibility and acceptance and resistance, like these were sort of themes that at least in some of the ChatGPT outputs came up. And this was also something where like me and sort of our respondent in the interview were like, okay, this is actually something that was not as like explicitly mentioned in the in our interview, but more of like a something where we had the feeling, okay, these could be starting points for looking at how like looking at sort of like underlying meanings, so to say. And then we thought about, okay, how could we maybe like explore this a bit more, this like understanding meaning dimension. And one thing, at least for us, we always like our perspective is that like qualitative research is not like theoretical in nature. So we thought that one way of like in this context operationalizing this like understanding meaning could be to kind of think about how like what we see in the data speaks to like broader discourses, and it could be embedded into like broader theoretical debates, so to say. And so this was then when we thought, okay, we asked ChatGPT to kind of look at this data from like a Marxist perspective, and we used Marxism in a sense because we had the feeling, okay, this is one example for like these like in the Crotty sense, like capital T theories of sort of social life, and also something that potentially may be very applicable in sort of the topic of this interview, where it's about like introducing a new technology in like a human work interaction or labor context. So this is where we thought like, okay, this might be applicable, this might be interesting. And actually, what ChatGPT came back with, in our sense, was really interesting, and it was very like in a sense, it was more thought-provoking than we thought. And we're like, okay, this is really interesting. And then of course, if like I guess as like in any interaction or in any interpretation, it's always then about like engaging with this interpretation, and it might not agree with everything. Same as I might not agree with every interpretation like a colleague or like another partner on a research project might come back with, but it's like definitely something where we had the feeling, okay, this is something we could engage with and kind of move beyond this very descriptive level. But then at the same time, we're like, okay, there's also the angle of understanding meaning in the sense of when something doesn't fit and something is very like sort of not aligning with what is there in the data. And there we thought, okay, let's try it out. What happens if we ask ChatGPT to kind of engage with or like to apply a lens that, in our opinion, does not fit at all or does not align at all with like what meaning we would see in this data. And I did my PhD on vaccine hesitancy. So we asked ChatGPT, okay, now use like a very vaccine hesitancy specific framework, which kind of lists different antecedents of vaccine hesitancy. And in a sense, it's not surprising because that's not how LLMs are sort of wired. But of course, ChatGPT, in a sense, did not care at all about this mismatch that we kind of would expect any human researcher that we interact with to at least like comment upon or be like, okay, wait a second, like what are we trying to do here right now? Like, is this something that we do on purpose to kind of challenge our understanding of this data, or is this something or should we look for something that like where the match to the meaning that we construct in the data is more apparent? But yeah, this was something where we had the feeling, okay, it's at least our like it was definitely for us an example of how ChatGPT did not conform with what we as humans would have considered one step of like at least showing understanding of a piece of qualitative data. At the same time, it might also suggest like a new way of like constructing meaning, so to say, or aligning theory and data. But this was something where we then like thought about quite a bit. And one other aspect where we had the feeling, okay, we are reaching some limits in a sense, and this is also something that has been debated quite a bit since then, I think, is this topic of hallucinations. And this is something that we saw a lot in the context of asking ChatGPT for quotes to kind of support some of the themes. And on the one hand, it was like it suggested amazing quotes, they made sense for the themes, and they kept to the like ductus of the interview encounter and everything. They often did not exist in the interview. So some of them were completely made up. Some of them were like edited quite a bit without kind of any indication, which I think is also something like maybe a limitation or a challenge that, of course, is not like unique to the qualitative like to applying LLMs in like the qualitative space, but it's something else where we were like, okay, this might not work, or it might not work in the way that we traditionally have thought about qualitative research. And as I mentioned, and these were some of like our core takeaways, but of course a lot has happened in these past like 2 or 2.5 years. And we have the feeling, or like my understanding right now, and this is something that like how we are currently debating it in our group, but also where I have the feeling sort of the literature is currently going, or the debates are currently going. It's this, okay, to what degree can ChatGPT or can LLMs, whatever, do qualitative research in the way that we as qualitative researchers have done it in the past, and like use these same paradigms that we had, and like use the coding and then quotes to support the themes, like these steps. And on the one hand, there are more and more, and MaxQDA is just one example, like more and more of these offers of like auto coding and like LLM supported analysis, like reflexive thematic analysis, but supported by LLMs. So this idea of like, okay, we have specific research approaches or paradigms that have been around for a while, and now LLMs can support us in that. At the same time, and this is something like where I think my thinking is going right now, and I think David, there's also like you also have explored this quite a bit, and there's increasing also debate, and it's just one example in this space of like, yeah, maybe these paradigms do not work in the same way if we bring LLMs in. So maybe maybe it's not a fair question, so to say. To what degree can LLMs do exactly the same thing that human researchers have done in the past, and to what degree does it just change the way that we do qualitative research? And I think this is like a really, like, in a sense, fascinating moment in time. At the same time, for me, and also then in our sort of debates and in our working group, we also had the feeling, okay, to what degree is data analysis, like the step of data analysis, the moment in sort of the qualitative research workflow where we want LLM-based support the most? Like, is this like what makes qualitative research so, like, for us, like what is the inherently human component to qualitative research? And that kind of sparked us in thinking about, well, what about the other steps of like the qualitative workflow, beyond the data analysis bits? And so this is something that we have explored a bit more now in the last few months. And I just wanted to like give a few directions that we're currently thinking in, and where I'm also super happy to hear kind of experiences and thoughts across these different phases. And so in a sense, like starting with the study design, and then also the training and like the piloting phase, so everything that happens before data collection, I think there is quite a bit of debate that's ongoing with regard to like research in general. But also in the qualitative space, we do currently try out in several ways, like how LLMs might be able to help with like drafting tools, help with like engaging like in the ideation phase, like in the sense of sparring partner, or material development, things like that. But one thing that I find particularly interesting is also this like the potential of LLMs to kind of support in piloting, and this is something that there are also more and more efforts, and we are starting to try these out, and happy to hear other experiences of like sort of LLM based respondents. And this is something that sort of I'm still quite hesitant to kind of use it as like then data collection, so to say, but it is something that for us comes up more and more in the context of like initial piloting, just trying out like how an interview guide might work, not to kind of replace actually like piloting in the field, but like as an initial step. And this for me is like really fascinating and like works surprisingly well. As I said, I'm still kind of hesitant when it comes to this idea of like actually using LLMs to then simulate the respondent themselves and like to use it as data. Sort of curious to see where this is headed. In the context of data collection, as I said, like not yet to kind of simulate the data, but what we do, and this links back to like this design and implementation work, maybe we routinely then have like bigger groups of data collectors in the respective setting, like across the different language groups and aspects like that. And then what we try to do is like to sit down and have these structured debriefings, like at the end of a day of data collection. And this is something where just sort of we more and more also then have like use LLMs to kind of summarize these debriefing notes and this mass of information to kind of keep in mind on the next day of data collection, like ideas for lines of inquiry or sort of directions to look in. In cases where there is no debriefing partner, it might also, like LLMs might also have this potential to kind of be like this kind of sounding board. We work across like quite a bit of modalities in terms of data, and also there, like in this timely aspect of like having these intervention iterations. That's something that we're only starting to explore. But what I find really interesting is in this like co-design process, this idea of like iterating prototypes over the data collection phase. And this is something where we where we often are in the situation of like, okay, if we design an intervention, like often it takes a while to kind of integrate the feedback of end users and prepare the new prototype. And this is something where maybe it's not as problematic that LLMs don't give out this perfectly reliable product that you then are like happy to kind of roll out, but it is a mechanism where you potentially could just try out some new ideas. And this is an example from a colleague at our institute, and she's looking at zoonotic spillover risk in Thailand. And there were different ideas of what the intervention could look like. And someone suggested like a community, like a play. And gave some ideas for like a storyline. And then of course it's very easy to kind of generate like an idea for a play, and then it's often easier to give like very practical feedback if you have like instead of an empty page, you have like a very first draft. And similar to like informational interventions where you kind of integrate like these qualitative feedback bits, if you kind of can generate these prototypes and then get feedback on an actual thing instead of coming back 2 weeks later with like something from a graphic designer or something like that. I also like in terms of the sort of the data transformation step, of course, and this is something that comes up more and more, is this like transcription of data and LLM-based transcription. And there, like we do try and use it. It's something also where like often we work across a few different languages, and of course it works much better in like English and other very common languages. But it does in some instances help across like some resource constraints. We're trying it out with NoScribe mainly. But then also like the translation, the summaries of like massive data sets, like social media data that are inherently qualitative, but no human qualitative researcher can kind of sift through it, is something that we are currently exploring. And one idea, and that's something I actually received an email this morning, I think from Deduce, the qualitative software company, that they are starting now a service as well for like de-identifying qualitative data, which I find really interesting, sort of as a potential, and also very challenging. Like, to what degree do we lose the nuance that's in there? And it's one of these instances where I'm like, okay, I'm really like curious to see how it goes and sort of to explore it. But yeah, I could imagine it also challenging some of what I think makes qualitative research inherently qualitative. And I think this like applies to quite a few of these data transformation uses of LLMs where I have the feeling, okay, it's so inherently already interpretative, and like the boundary between the data transformation and the data analysis is often so fluid, also in terms of like how you kind of familiarize yourself with the data set, how you transcribe, what you keep, what you don't transcribe, all these kind of aspects, that I have the feeling this is something that that maybe from a qualitative perspective is important for me to kind of think about these use cases, but then also to think about, well, what decisions are we making along this step. And then, just sort of a very few words, like this last step, I think there's a lot of debate, and many of you probably have used it in terms of like writing up papers or developing grant ideas and things like that. Just one thing that I find really interesting in sort of the qualitative space, and it might also be related to us like communicating across different audiences often in this design and implementation space, was this that we had the feeling, okay, often figure development is really helpful to kind of communicate qualitative insight to like different audiences, but it can also be really challenging to not suggest like a quantification of the data. And this is something, it's also from the zoonotic spillover risk work, where it, like, for us was really interesting to kind of think through different ideas for how we can communicate this qualitative data in a sense. So where I am right now, and I think that's where I said in the beginning, I'm very happy to discuss, because I think it's sort of one of these, like, it's so rapidly developing, and I think we are all trying to kind of figure out our own perspective as a field as a whole, so to say. So my thinking is, well, we cannot be sure in terms of like this understanding meaning question, especially also like whether the concept of meaning, like to what degree the concept of meaning is even applicable here. And of course, there are a lot of ethical challenges that I didn't touch on in detail. So of course, the topic of bias and what happens with the data that we upload there, in terms of accessibility to these tools and to the results, the resources that go into it. So there's like a lot of like quite a big space in terms of the challenges behind it, or what I think we should be kind of careful about or be aware of. I also think they won't go away, and people will use LLMs, and students will use it, and like other research, like so I think I think we just need sessions like these to kind of talk about it and learn from each other. And I also think that it's not like, we cannot really expect that LLMs will ever like exactly apply or exactly do the type of qualitative research and like use the same paradigms that we have used in the past. So maybe it's about like also thinking about new perspectives, which is already like happening a lot, and also use cases across this workflow. But I do think that if we kind of keep these aspects in mind and share our like experience with these, I do think that there are like use cases where it could really benefit sort of our work and kind of spark, like also potentially do a lot of things that were not possible in the past. So I think it's a lot about like not necessarily figuring out how LLMs can do the work that humans did in the past in the qualitative research, but maybe do something else or add to it. Yeah, this was it from my side. So yeah, thanks a lot. And as I said, super happy to discuss. And yeah, the publication is out. We're currently thinking about another publication in terms of these workflow bits. But in general, just very happy to be in touch and hear from you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jonas. David, are you happy to start? And you can share your
Let's
screen.
see where we're ready to go.
Right.
I think this will be good.
Here we
All
go. So
right.
Professor David Morgan is going to present on best practices for analyzing qualitative data with artificial intelligence.
Right. Let me say in the beginning, before I start really, many, many years ago, I actually studied long-term care. And for my dissertation, I did a participant observation and grounded theory in a long-term care facility. I'm sure my knowledge is severely out of date in that regard. But today I will be talking about best practices, and talk will be in three parts, and they'll sort of follow a timeline kind of idea. So starting with the current state of the art for doing qualitative data analysis with AI, then some next steps that I think are going on now around conversational analysis with AI, and then at least a brief look at some of my thoughts about what future directions will be. Okay, and I think some of the parts of my presentation will dovetail nicely with some of the things Johannes already talked about. So, what about the current state of the art for doing qualitative data analysis with AI? What's been going on for the last couple of years? And I think the paper that Johannes and his co-authors presented is going to be a good example of this. And what we see a lot is studies that use AI in an attempt to replicate coding as a strategy for generating themes. And in particular, we start by sort of a three-part process. So first you analyze the data using traditional techniques with CACDAS. So I'll use the phrase traditional here several times, but I think it's our classic. We take interviews and we use the computer-assisted qualitative data analysis with software approach. We use that technology and we're looking for themes as our results. Now, certainly not all qualitative research takes that format, but I'm going to be looking at this idea that we typically in the past have worked with moving from codes to themes. So first we do that with literally a human, okay? And then good practices like Johannes demonstrated, you have a separate person perhaps reanalyze the same data with an AI program, and then you compare the two sets of results. Okay, so we've been doing things like this for a couple of years now, and their paper is a good example. I've collected over 100 studies that follow this format, either publications or preprints, and overall AI-based analysis can do a pretty good job of matching the results from traditional analysis, and specifically they generate comparable kinds of themes. So if we look at the themes that we would get from a traditional analysis, by hand or human-based, and then look at careful AI-based analysis, the themes are pretty much similar. So that's very reassuring. But I think there's some major problems with this approach, and Johannes hinted at this for sure, that it forces the use of AI into a preconceived version of qualitative analysis. Takes what we've been doing in the past and says, can we push AI into that framework and essentially replicate it? And I think the problem really is that fails to take advantage of the basic strengths of AI. Instead of starting with what AI is good for and saying, how can we use those strengths and get the most out of them for qualitative data analysis sort of stands that on its head and says, how can we take previous versions and can we adapt AI to fit into that mold? Well, if I'm going to argue we should start from the strengths of AI, what do I say those basic strengths are? And I put this in terms of that classic framework we've used in the past, coding and themes. So with regard to what we do with codings, coding is basically summarizing what's in the data. I think some people question whether coding is or is not analysis. Are you really beginning to interpret the data, or are you simply trying to capture what's in it? Well, at any rate, AIs have a tremendous strength in terms of summarizing large amounts of data. Now, what I'll be talking about today is really a fairly traditional kind of qualitative research in the sense that you might go out and do interviews, do 12 or 20 interviews, you might do 6 or 8 focus groups, whatever. So I'm not going to be talking about very large amounts of data, what some people talk about operating at scale. I'm thinking of what we've classically done in terms of interviewing to collect data in a qualitative study, and thinking of back in the old days, that was a large stack of data. Now it's quite a number of kilobytes of data that we've got in all our transcripts, and thinking of that as a large amount of data that we're going to use the AI to summarize. And thinking of that as, in essence, replacing coding. We'll get into that in more detail. But as we move from codes to themes, the strength of AI here is finding patterns in large amounts of data. Okay, so if we say that AI is very good at summarizing data and finding patterns in data, then I'm going to say that, gee, well, that's where we should be moving to build on those strengths. All right, well, let's talk about coding. And AI does not generate codes in the same way that humans do. I would say that it's not impossible to do standard kinds of coding that we use now, but it's really not a very effective way to use AIs. In particular, if you ask an AI for codes, and these are, the different font that reflects, this would be a prompt. You say, what are a basic set of codes in this data? Or you could ask it for themes. What are the most important themes in this data? Or what are the main topics in this data? Well, if those are just the questions you ask at the start, AIs will probably produce fairly similar results for all those prompts. And typically it would be 6 or so broad responses. So that's very different than what we would be doing if we were doing hand coding in particular. So here we've got the AI's ability to summarize large amounts of data. So the strong tendency when you ask it to do these things like finding codes and themes and topics is it's going to summarize that data into a fairly small number of broad responses. Now that's different from traditional analyses. There we break the data into segments that you can code. That's the first step. Second step, well, we go ahead and generate a set of categories that we take our codes that match each other. We get a reduced number of code categories. We work with those categories to generate a small number of themes, typically 3 to 5. Okay, well, think about that process. Many of you have probably done that. How many codes do you have to begin with? It depends on what kind of data analysis approach you're using. What if you've got framework analysis or reflective thematic analysis or whatever it is? You can have dozens or 100 codes. Then you've got to reduce those into categories according to, with a similarity based, you might have 10, 20 categories, and somehow out the back you end up with 3 to 5 themes. And I will say that my reading of that literature and Johnny Saldana, for example, a really good example, really strong on coding. But how those 3 to 5 themes come up out of the coding is a bit of a mysterious process, even though we've been doing it for a generation now. So if AI analyses, what's different there is you can ask for themes directly without coding. And the AI will give you a list of what I call potential or candidate themes. In other words, I don't take the AI literally and say, okay, I'm done. Wow, it gave me my themes. In fact, I do something like what Johannes and company did. I asked for it multiple different ways. They had one, two, three with ChatGPT. And I produce a number of different candidate themes, and then that's part of my work as an analyst is to work with the Chat GPT to refine those initial themes and produce what I think of as at least something that I'm going to refine and ultimately reach some conclusions about those themes. But I'm going to have Chat GPT working with me as a partner in producing that list of themes. Okay, so now we've got this idea of finding patterns in large amounts of data. So we don't just code it and then work forever with those codes and produce themes. We really work with ChatGPT as a partner in finding themes, finding patterns in the data. Okay, so here I've got the robots and some things to avoid with your using AI. Don't try to do detailed coding with AI. That is not one of its strengths. Okay, and don't try to aggregate codes into themes. That's not a AI type process either. AI can produce themes without coding. And here are our robots that illustrate what we should be doing with AI, summarizing large amounts of text, detecting deeper patterns in that text. Okay, so that's my view of what we've been doing, particularly this idea of replicating existing coding and thematic strategies. My idea where to go with next steps is a more conversational approach. And this is what I'm doing, and there are definitely others working in this same space. So I'll describe what this is about. And if I can get the chat to work for me, I'll give you some references that I'll paste in when I'm done. Okay, so for the conversational approach, I'm thinking of this as a second wave of AI approaches to qualitative data analysis, whereas I just described the earlier approach was reproducing traditional techniques. The marker for success in that earlier approach is generating AI-based analyses that match previous hand-done analyses. Okay, well, the conversational approach builds directly on the strengths of AI. It begins by using the AI to summarize data and generate themes. Then it asks for further insights into those initial results to locate patterns, patterns among themes, themes and patterns. Okay, marker for success is to generate a deeper understanding that goes beyond a list of themes. And I'll talk about this here. Almost all current uses of AI stop when they produce a list of themes. I've done this myself, and when I get a good list of themes that each one really captures an important part of the data, they're well illustrated by quotations, they really help the reader understand the participant's perspective and experiences, I'm happy. But that's the traditional goal and been to produce that list of themes and to stop there. Now, I would say part of the reason for that is quite simply, it's not just that that's a good job, that it definitely is, but it's also exhausting to get to that point. You feel like you've really produced something and you're happy with it. Well, second wave conversational approaches, they can produce those kind of candidate themes right at the beginning. It erases quite a lot of the work there in terms of the initial coding and categorizing, and you can begin to work and refine those potential themes very early in the process. And after you choose the final set of themes, you can really begin to investigate them in more depth and detail. And I'll talk about what I mean by that. One of the things you can do, particularly with the themes, is to begin to build models. So that's an example of the more depth and detail you can get in conversational analyses. You can use that list of candidate themes and ask about the relations between themes. And you can build a systematic network that connects themes. So that idea of building a thematic network is not new. Okay, the best citation I know of, and it comes from 2001, but it's only been used very rarely. And conversational analyses with AI make this a much more straightforward process. Okay, so you can really talk about theme A and theme B and ask ChatGPT what it thinks are the relationships between them, or you can ask about sets of sub-themes and ask how those sub-themes overlap and really get a good idea of connectivity among your themes. But that's just kind of one general process of building models. Well, any basic model asks, how do themes fit together? Okay, so not just a list of themes, but their interrelationships. And then the more advanced model would indicate why do themes fit together in the way they do. So this is actually beginning to come close to some theory building. And, most of our qualitative analyses, we've been happy to stop somewhat short of theory building, but now we're saying the themes are sort of the basic building blocks, and we can think about how they fit together into patterns. And then, presumably, if this, keeps going the direction it is now, we can ask that why question. Why did they fit together this way? Working that out again in conversation with the AI. So here are the robots again. On the left is our not so happy robot trying to produce his list of themes with a misshapen shovel. And on the right, we've got the smiling robot who's building models as the next level. So that's kind of my optimistic view of where we might go. And let's talk about part three now, the final part, some future directions. And this will just be sort of a bigger picture thing. I won't have as much specifics as I did in part two. But if we currently use AI in terms of what we've been doing for qualitative analysis, I've said that it only takes us so far, but that's true in a bigger sense too, because it's simply based on efficiency. Okay. We meet our traditional goals, but we do it faster and easier. Okay. Well, if we think about innovation as a whole topic, which I've been doing, certainly that idea of reaching traditional goals with new ideas, new machinery, new technology, doing it faster and easier, that's a big step in quite a lot of progress right there. Well, we'd be doing things not just more efficiently, but differently if we go into conversational analysis. We can ask the question here, which is, somewhat threatening, really. What if coding is dead? And Johannes also mentioned something by Suzanne Fries. And she says, stop coding and start talking. Stop coding your data, start talking to your data. And that conversational talking idea is what I've been advocating in the previous section. And then I'm going to say one of the ways that we can see we're making progress is just by building simple models. But even that takes us beyond our comfort zone. It asks us to do things that are really fairly unfamiliar now. There just aren't that many qualitative articles that get their list of themes and then show us a model for connecting those themes. Well, I'm saying that's something we're going to move towards being able to do more and more, and that's just one easily foreseeable option. So thinking about this as an innovation, it can be quite a powerful innovation. Okay. But it's at the end of the story. We can ask just how disruptive will AI be in qualitative data analysis? And truly disruptive innovations go beyond efficiency to enhance effectiveness. Okay, so I'm going to say that if we did conversational type analysis, model building, etc., we'd have a more effective model, not just a quicker and easier model. And they can also move a field in unanticipated directions. Now, we haven't really seen anything like this in recent qualitative data analysis. And I'm going to use a counterexample here. Cactus, which originated in the late 1980s, and I was an early adapter of that. I think very few people on this broadcast will remember the ethnograph, but it was a very early qualitative data analysis program that I worked with extensively. But all of the ones that we have now and that we've opened up since then are basically a shift from truly manual procedures to equivalent computer-based ways of doing things. And then, sort of marking codes, retrieving codes, organizing codes. That's what this software has done, and that's what we were doing before that. And what we've seen over the years in the evolution of this software is really adding new features. So if Vivo puts in a feature, and 6 months later, Max QDA will have that and even more. And so that's how they've been competing. But the programs have still seen minimal disruption of anything in qualitative data analysis over that past 40 plus years. Well, if we follow what I've been saying about building on the strengths of AI itself, particularly conversational analysis as an example, that would be highly disruptive. Coding would be dead, model building would be much more common. Those would really be we would produce not just faster answers, but open up whole new ways of doing things. So, in terms of future directions, that's my optimistic view. There are a lot of people out there now who would say, let's just get rid of AI altogether. I'm certainly with Johannes on that one and saying that, that's just probably not going to happen. But I think we will see disputes about that upcoming in the near future. And just to give you some resources, I will, as I say, try to post these in the chat. But here are 4 papers on conversational analysis, and 2 of them are published and 2 of them are still under review. So I will do my best to share those with you. And thank you very much. That's the presentation I have. And I can stop sharing. There we go.
Great. Thank you very much to our presenters today. If you have any questions, maybe people have posted already questions in the chat, or if you have any questions you want to ask, please raise your hand.
Yes, so in the many audience already put their question in the chat, so I can go over a question for each presenter first, and the Kiara can go over for the question for both presenters. So I can start with for the question for the Jonas, and then the audience asking about you shared some example where ChatGPT gave hallucinatory output and the thematic the classification and how to handle that, and then compared to the human qualitative research, is there any suggestion to handle it in the future?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. I think it depends a lot on what type of hallucination we are talking about. So I like if we look at the data analysis, I mean, I very much echo what David described, that, well, hallucinations in data analysis, we probably have to anyways think about, because we have to think about how we do the data analysis. And that will involve how do we engage with the hallucination, or with the tendency to hallucinate in certain topics. But as of now, yeah, I'm very curious and happy to kind of think about the direction we're headed in. I think across these different, if we look across the workflow, we can see hallucinations at every step. And I think there it really depends also what step are we looking at, because in some instances it might be easy to spot hallucinations. And that's where then the human comes in. And if we are at a more conversational level, so to say, be it at the ideation bits or then the writing up and things like that, it's of course up to the human to kind of challenge it and be like, okay, no, wait a second, this is there is the human responsibility to it. I think then there are some steps where it is a lot about quite diligent checking. We see it a lot in if we look at the data transformation bits in terms of transcribing or translating data, which makes a big difference in our case, but also there I mean, we have a lot of interview recordings from places where, let's say, there's a tin roof and then it's raining, and so that the recording is like quite noisy. And then if you give it to a human transcriber, they transcribe it, they listen, then they like they pull out their hair at like sort of like for a stretch of 20 seconds, and they keep listening to it, and at some point they type like, okay, this I just cannot understand. Um, and they move on to the next section. What AI transcription does, like for exactly that stretch, they often hallucinate and they just make up what might have been said in that period of time. And that, of course, is something then where I would say, okay, this is where, like, yeah, why, at least for now, I think with the state that we are in now, like it is a lot about then human checking and like yeah, sort of living up to that responsibility, to so to say. So sometimes I think it's a lot about engaging with the hallucinations, if it's about like the creativity part of it and like the ideation of new data collection techniques, or new ways of co-designing things. And so to say, if AI hallucinates there and says like, oh yeah, this might be interesting, but no one else has ever talked about it. I mean, let's think about it. But then at other times, yeah, I think it's a lot about like very responsible checking. And in the data analysis bits, I think it's about rethinking parts of the data analysis process to kind of navigate this challenge.
Awesome, thanks. And the second question is that at the start of your presentation, so you have the positional statement that grounds your study with your background and the perspective. So what is like a consequence of the AI mediated researches? Can an AI engines have the reflectively like a statement and engage in the reflectivity?
Yeah, I love that question. I saw it in the chat, and it's I find it super fascinating, like a super fascinating topic, because in a way, I mean, AI like or LLMs often try to do that. I have the feeling, like sort of I haven't used it as much in a conversational sense yet, but they're like I have the feeling like every time it says, well, remember, I'm just an AI, like take all this like with caution. There might be some things with regard to the training I cannot do, like all these bits, which like may read like a positionality statement or like as a very reflexive engagement, but then at the same time it's like very like coded into it, I think, to kind of like just in an accountability sense, I guess. So there, I think it's interesting, and it's interesting to engage with it. But I also think that the way, at least a lot of the LLMs that I have engaged with quite a bit, and I mean, there's a lot of literature on that also. Yeah, like this tendency to just reinforce or support basically everything that the user is saying. So I think outsourcing the AI reflexivity to the AI might result a bit in like, yeah, I could imagine that we go quite far down like a rabbit hole there, where then a lot of like the data that the AI already has about you as the user, like what do you maybe want to hear? Like, are you someone who values reflexivity? Are you someone who values like the impression of the AI is sure about its position and its objectivity and things like that? Like, yeah, I could imagine that AI will always have this tendency to kind of try and echo the epistemological stance of the user, if you want. So yeah, I think it's interesting, and I would be happy to read if reflexivity statements of the AI, but then I would also be even more happy, I guess, to read the human sort of contextualization of that AI reflexivity statement.
Thanks. All right, and then our next question goes to the David. So, while I agree that AI is good for summarization, and do you like handle the missing part, and how do you check them it's correct? And then, what if the missing part is essential for like synthesizing or the building the coding?
Well, I'm not sure what the missing parts are. I mean, if you think about what we try to ultimately do is generate themes. I mean, this is a process of data reduction. You've got to start with those dozens and dozens of pages of transcript and find the core essences that are in them. And that's the kind of summarization that we're looking for in using AI. The main way I think about this in terms of anything that's missing is you've got to begin by familiarizing yourself with your data. You really have to know your data, and there's no substitute for that. I've done 3 detailed analyses using ChatGPT, and I haven't ever seen a hallucination in terms of producing a theme. I think there's some themes, some things that AIs are good at, like that. Some things they're obviously not good at, and Johannes demonstrated that. If you ask for quotations and things like that, I just don't do that. I do that at the very end of my analysis by going back through the data. I take the themes that I've got and say, as I read back through this data, and again, I'm dealing with a manageable data set, but I say, are these themes really in here and are they important when they're mentioned? Is there something that's missing that I should take into account? And where can I find some good quotations that really work with my themes? Uh, not just that AIs can hallucinate quotations, but I don't think they're very good at helping you put together the package of themes that you're really going to use, or package of quotations that you're really going to use. Uh, so I, start with familiarizing myself with the data, and I finish with checking my results against the data, and that's how I handle those kinds of issues.
Thanks so much. And then I hand over to the Chiara for the most question.
Yeah, so one question was about testing the prompt. And they were asking, would you be able to describe how your team tests the prompt and how to fine-tune it to achieve the same result?
Mm-hmm. Well, we aren't looking to obtain the same results in the first place. What we're doing is, I like to say there's no perfect prompt for producing results. Instead, we try to use a variety of different prompts and look at the variety of responses we get. And then as humans, we work with those possibilities, those candidate themes, and then come up with our own list of what we feel is the best summary and take that back to the AI and say, here are the set of things we want to use. What might we be missing if we looked only at these as core themes? Or do these themes overlap so much that we don't need them all? Those are things we can discuss with each other, but we can also feed them into the software and have it as I like the phrase I saw go by in the first presentation, a sparring partner, where okay, this is what we think is going on. But to me, this is where a lot of the reflection goes on. I love working in a team because we get a real reflectivity there. And if we don't have a team to work with, then working back and forth with the AI really forces us to think about our own assumptions. And we can ask it to challenge us or we can challenge it. But you've really got to put yourself into the process. The machine has zero reflexivity as far as I'm concerned. So it's up to you to create a reflexive process in your interactions with the software.
Jonas, do you want to come in? Would you like to give your view on prompts?
No, I think I echo a lot of that, and I also think, I mean, like running, like iterating the same prompt again and again, you will also end up with different results.
Yeah.
So like I think, I mean, of course there are some like there are like tips and tricks in like what is a good prompt, of course, and there's almost an art to like designing a prompt. But I think in the end, it always has this like whatever it is, it's not randomness probably, but like there are these nuances that kind of then result in the same prompt, like giving out different results. And in a way, I actually like that because I mean, it's the same as like not the same, but it's a similar pattern as when we talk with humans. Like it's not that the same question or like the same person does the same qualitative analysis or comes up with exactly the same results every time. Like even if it could rerun, so to say, its own, like we could rerun our own prompts. So yeah, I think I like this idea of rather than like spending crazy amounts of time and like perfecting the one prompt and then taking the one output that this prompt generates, to kind of, yeah, maybe almost play a bit more with this inherent kind of like fluidity of the results that or the feedback we may get.
Great. Then we have doing a bit of thematic analysis of the questions we got in the chat. There seems to be some questions around choice of the model, large language models to use, and using ChatGPT instead of other publicly available models. Do you want to comment on that a little bit, both of you or either of you?
Yeah. I've played around with using different versions of ChatGPT for analysis of the same data and, really, again, knowing my data and asking it to summarize and saying, gee, do I like 3.5, 4.0, 4.5? I hear a lot of people don't like 5.0, so I haven't gone into that. But in terms of my own dialogues with the different chat GPTs, where the things that John has talked about more for upfront developing your ideas, your instruments, or later working on your writing and thinking about how you might organize things. So there I've used particularly Claude is another option, and I really liked Claude better for that sort of thing, but I haven't used it particularly for data analysis. Again, we're talking about how fast this field is developed. I mean, when we were starting, there wasn't anything except ChatGPT. So you could choose among earlier or later versions of it, but that was the tool that we had.
Jonas?
Yeah, I mean, I also think that by now, like, there's just a mass of sort of different models and different options available and things like that. And I like we try to kind of keep up at some point and like compile like a list of recommendations and try out different things. I think it's challenging. But then at the same time, I think all of us at some point, as we try it out for different tasks, we do develop our like our preferences. I have the feeling as we look at like for us at these different phases of like the workflow, there are some things where models, like especially if it's more these technical aspects of like transcription or translation or like where I would be confident to say, okay, one model does perform better than the other. But then in other instances, I have the feeling it's also a bit up to personal preference. Like, do you like more the the more technical like response style of some of the models? Do you like it more like this very flowery and engaging emoji heavy of some of the ChatGPT models? Which I mean, like, yeah, I think again, it's something that I actually do like about it that it doesn't have this like very clear cut, okay, this is the best, this is the worst, but they all have like their nuance to it, and it's a lot about exploring it. Maybe one thing related to models where it's actually also something that I find really interesting is sort of this trade-off between like, yeah, computational power and the ability to kind of keep data confidential in a sense, and like to like this ability to run certain models like locally on like a smaller university server or your own computer, and like where DeepSeek is really like a sort of very, and Llama I think is the other one that are very like open so or like available in the sense of that you can like run it. And then of course, like if you constrain computational power so much, the outputs are very like very different. At the same time, I feel much more like comfortable with using it that way because I have the feeling there's much more control about it. So yeah, I think sorry, I think that goes also in a different like like discussion point potentially.
Indeed, but that's very much linked to another question we received in the chat, which was around the identification, local processing, or data use agreements, and which, I mean, I would bundle up everything under ethics and touching also on to protecting privacy and confidentiality. And I mean, when we do interviews, for example, and we enter in this kind of social encounter interaction with our participants, we do care about them. We want to believe, and we want to care about them not just when we interview them, but also when we go and analyze the data. So, having said all of this, do you want to share, I don't know,
I
good
will.
practices
Yeah, I'll
on this
start
point?
anyway.
Yes, please.
That somebody asked about anonymization, etc. I too saw a promo for this program that's supposed to anonymize your data for you. I'm very skeptical about that, but for me, that's part of the familiarization process. I had to read through the data to anonymize it, and so that's just one thing I do there. One thing I definitely don't recommend is transcribing your own data. That's really very difficult, and unless you're really good, I don't think you learn much from the process. The concentration you have to put into transcribing tends to degrade the concentration you can put into understanding your data. But so anonymizing for me is like the last step after I've collected the data, usually myself or with a team, and then go through it and take out any identifiers. And then when you go into the AIs, there seems to be a low awareness that you can turn off the AI's ability to use your data. Okay. And they love to grab any data they can gather and put it into their training base. In the early models, that was all they would do, but now you can turn that off and not give it access to your data. So I think there's some IRBs out there that are just paranoid about that, but it's built into all of the major programs to ban the AI from absorbing your data in any permanent sense. So you can write an informed consent that assures your participants that their data will not be shared in any way outside the research group.
Yeah, I find that like super fascinating because I think we also like in Heidelberg we do have an IRB which definitely doesn't like that in any way, which has restricted also our ability to kind of explore a bit more. It's also then there's the additional layer of like the EU data protection laws, which, for example, what you describe on like turning it off, and sort of the additional uses that won't be enough for like using our data in any way with it because it's still the servers and still like very little control about it. So I find it super interesting, sort of this debate around like what level of data protection in a sense is enough. I also find it really interesting in the anonymization thing because like my perspective always was that it's basically impossible to anonymize qualitative data. And even more so in my perspective, in sort of this LLM space, which as you described, David, it's insanely good in like recognizing patterns. So I would imagine that basically any as much de-identified as you want interview transcript, like I could imagine that most of the LLMs are very well capable to kind of identify a pattern which very much like makes the respondent identifiable. So I find it like I find it super fascinating as like an ethical debate on how we engage with this quite massive gray area potentially between like switching it up in the model for sure, to kind of I only run things on like with sort of like a very toned down DeepSeek version on my laptop.
Yeah.
Great. Do we have time for one last question? Maybe before we wrap up. So one question from Michael says, are we at a phase where we no longer need to validate AI generation of themes and can't stop comparing AI-generated themes and human-generated themes.
Mhm.
Thoughts on this?
Well, I would say that if we could somehow do a meta-synthesis, meta-analysis, that my feeling is that we really are kind of at that point that we've seen over and over again that AI can reproduce the same themes as humans. It does it in a very different fashion, but we still, as I said, need to check our product of our analysis against our data. Uh, you can't just take data you don't know anything about and dump it into AI and ask what are the themes and say you're done. I mean, that's the old computer expression, garbage in, garbage out. You've got to know that data. You've got to reflect on the machine's interpretations of that data. And I would say you need to take your conclusions back to the data. So the human is in the loop at every step in my version.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think sort of from maybe a slightly like complementary angle, I also have the feeling it's not that like the only qualitative research that saw the light of day before LLMs came around was like amazing, super convincing, like very rigorous development of themes. Like I have the feeling um, it's maybe also how as a field we kind of develop an understanding of how maybe the qualitative research that we see being published or being presented and in whatever way how it might be developing since Gen AI or LLMs came around, and sort of what are the shifts that we are seeing, and sort of how David, how you described, like maybe we see more like actually exciting model development and less descriptive stuff, because the descriptive stuff becomes so easy to get that it's not as interesting anymore. So that's something where I'm like, okay, I see the point of like, okay, maybe we don't need to check like on the theme level anymore whether the quality is the same. But I'm very curious to kind of start developing an understanding of sort of just the qualitative research that we see being published, how that because I'm pretty sure it will be changing. So and what that change looks like.
Great. One final question, please. Any views about creating synthetic data using LLM for model training, which seems to be an important application these days?
I'm dubious.
Same here.
In what
I've
ways?
just done too many interviews where I had no idea what they were going to say. And I've seen attempts to reproduce this, but you give the each participant a persona
Yeah.
and several different adjectives or experiential features that they've had, and then kind of reproduces a stereotype. I don't know. Maybe it's going to get better, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, for me, I think it relates a bit to this meme of like I was hoping that when robots come around, they can do my dishes and my laundry, and I can focus on art and writing. And basically, we see the opposite way around. Like I now have more time for like doing dishes and laundry. And I have the feeling also in the qualitative space, for me, it's a bit like this is so much the essence of it.
Yeah.
Like let's like from my side, let's try to figure out ways of how we can make this more exciting and maybe have also more time for this part of like understanding human experience or like gaining insight into like human interactions. Instead of like starting there and like generating the human interaction and then sitting there and transcribing it ourselves like word by word or something like that. So for me, yeah, I like having this space for now be the one I think of the last when it comes to uh, bringing LLMs in or AI in.
Great. So I want to thank again very much the speakers and presenters for today, and also thank you, Gion, and the data science interest group of the GOLTC who agreed to host this joint webinar with our qualitative research interest group. It was a pleasure, and I think we are ready to wrap up the session today. Please keep coming back, checking our webinar program, because more dates and more events will be added in the new year. That's all from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Mm.